A basic but very important world building consideration in your D&D game is creating towns and cities. Not only do they form the backbone of your world, but your players are likely to spend a lot of time in them. So today we're going to be discussing 10 steps for creating realistic and believable towns that will also serve as functional elements in your game. I've listed the steps roughly in the order that I usually do them, but they can be done out of order or even in parallel. Number 1. Origins. This is the history, perhaps a brief history, of how the town or city came to be. For example, in our Into the Fae Kickstarter that we did a couple years ago, we had a town that formed the hub of most of the adventures that happened in the game, and it was called Airedale. Airedale began as simply a bridge over a river, and over time, as merchants would stop there overnight to rest before they went over the bridge and on to their next destination, small little services began to spring up on either side of the bridge. Originally catering to these merchants, of course, it eventually began to grow and expand into a small city. We should probably call it a village at that point, later a town, and then perhaps called a city at this point. Not super complex, not super long, but a brief history of how that town came to be. And this history helps determine a few things. The size of the town, perhaps the location, why the town came to be can also influence the different services and businesses you might find there. It might influence the economy, but I've always found that having a general idea of how that town came to be helps inform the rest of creating that town. Number 2, government. Is it a monarchy with a king, a republic with a town council, a democracy, a dictatorship? I think that many early towns and governments were probably dictatorships, but that's not very popular these days, so good luck with that. Anything is possible ultimately, and some are more common historically, especially in medieval times, but we're talking about a fantasy game, so you can pretty much do what you want and nothing is off limits. My suggestion is when you're establishing the governments that are going to rule your towns or some of your towns, that you think about the overall theme of your game world, your campaign, your setting, and try to pick governments that might help reinforce that theme, that feel that you're going for. And you want to have some basic information about your towns or cities. You want the name of the ruler or the rulers. How are decisions made? Are there reoccurring meetings? Does the ruler just decide a thing and it's law? And how does the general populace interact with the rulers? Can they petition them? Can they meet with them? Or are they terrified of interaction and they pretty much keep their heads down and go about their business, lest they draw the ire of the big evil dictator in his tower and he might just smite them? Along those lines, what's the populace's general attitude toward their ruler? Are they happy with their ruler? Are they unhappy? Are they kind of like, well, you know, he's not a nice guy, but we live in peace and he mostly leaves us alone, so we're just gonna keep our mouths shut and live our lives. Now, at some point, those of you who have been following my content for a while are probably saying, wait a second, Luke, you've said many times that you prefer to use pre-existing campaign settings for your D&D games, and that you don't do much world building. Why should I trust you? That is a wonderful accusation. Thank you for bringing that up. I have a background as a writer, and one of the things I have spent a lot of time writing are fantasy books. Now, they're all just manuscripts, you can't buy them anywhere, but I have written a couple books. And part of the fantasy book writing process is creating a world for the story to take place in. Now in the past, I've created 2 extremely fleshed out worlds, and I have a handful of others that I created bits and pieces of. So I do have experience with world building, just in a different context than D&D. Now, yes, world building for a D&D game is a little bit different, and there are important considerations because we are creating the world for a game and not just a story. But as an experienced dungeon master, I know what those things are and the adjustments that need to be made. So I do have world building chops. Pretty nice ones too. Don't put that in there, Zack. Don't do it. Number 3, keeping the peace. Consider if there is a police force and an army in your town or city. Now, a police force keeps the peace internally and an army keeps the peace externally. However, in fantasy games, especially small towns, they're often the same. The police is the army and they keep peace in the town and outside the town from external threats. However, large cities, such as Waterdeep, if you're using the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, might have a watch, which is the police force, and then the soldiers outside, the army, that protects from outside threats. Probably really just depends on the size of your town. Consider things like what arms and armor do they have? Is it chainmail, swords, spears, shields? Do they use halberds? That sort of thing. Uniforms, insignias, what do the guards look like? Rank. lieutenant, captain, general, all that sort of thing, kind of have it fleshed out a little bit. The size of typical patrols that the group might encounter. And now we're getting to the meat of it, right? That the group might encounter, because what else is going to happen in your wonderful D&D game than the characters are going to run into the police force at one time or another. And having a good description and idea of how they work and what they look like is going to help you out. Also consider crime and punishment. What are the basic laws? And if you break them, what are the basic punishments? For instance, when we were creating Airedale for the Into the Fae Kickstarter, we broke things down a little bit like this. First level of crimes were petty crime. These covered things like fistfights, tavern brawls, minor pickpocketing, minor property damage, and they were accompanied by a small fine if you got caught. Everything is contingent upon getting caught, right? And then we had minor crime, which was armed assault and robbery, major property damage, and for those sorts of things you would pay a fine, pay reparations to the victim equal to the damage that you did, and you would spend time in jail or go through forced labor. And then we had major crime, things like murder, arson, poisoning a water supply, treason, and that sort of thing. And of course, you know, medieval fantasy world, so is what the punishment is if you get caught doing any of those. And people are like, well, medieval fantasy was just benevolent rulership and understanding. No, that's not how it used to work, folks. You got caught doing that stuff, it's over. It's Betty Bye time. You don't have to create a realistic game world. You could have it be utopian or something, I suppose, but just, you know what? Just next point. By the way, I've been using lots of examples from our Into the Fae module and the town of Airedale. And if you don't own Into the Fae, you can pick it up now if you'd like. It is a level 1 to 5 5th edition compatible adventure module featuring lots of new Fae creatures. And the adventures in it are designed to accommodate groups who prefer to use wits and talkie-talkie to progress their goals. Though it is D&D, so groups who like combat won't feel left out either. You can pick up the PDF and digital maps right now on the DM Lair store. And if you want to get the physical book, you could do so as part of the pre-order for our Lairs and Legends Kickstarter. There are links below to both. Number 4, commerce. Determine what drives the town's economy and agriculture. Now, sometimes these are the same thing, especially for small towns. Consider, how do people get food? How do they make money? Do they even need money, or is it mostly a trade economy instead of a wage economy? Pick a few main things commerce revolves around. Most towns have a few industries that form the bulk of their commerce. For instance, in Airedale, the economy revolved around lumber harvesting, going up to the forest, cutting it down, shipping it over the river, or perhaps by road, and mead creation and trade, because the Airedale was at a key point along the trade route from the east to the west, and there was a river running south, so many merchants on land and on the river passed through the town. And you can see, as we are starting to get into the depths of fleshing out some of these details, even though they're high level and very basic, Airedale is starting to come alive. We're starting to see and feel what the town is like. Number 5, organizations. Are there organizations, groups, or special societies in the town? Is there a merchant cartel, a workers union, a cabal of mages, a thieves guild? Who are their leaders, and what is their general organization? Create the basic details around these groups. What are those groups' goals, and what are they doing to achieve them? Does that create friction and strife in the town or region? Because if it is, you can use that. Those are adventure hooks. Now, real quick, if you're enjoying this video and think the information doesn't completely suck, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment for YouTube's merciless algorithm down below. Let me know if a Chihuahua is a real dog or should just be considered a down payment on a dog. And thank you, Ed. We already know what you think. Number 6, religion. Consider which religions are prominent in the town. Is there only one religion? Are there several religions, but only a few are the most popular? Perhaps there's a temple to one and only shrines to some of the others. Do you have a pantheon for your world? If not, perhaps now's the time to make one. In the future, by the way, I'm going to do a video on how to create a pantheon. Just gonna have to wait for it. Sorry. By the way, let me know down below in the comments if you want to see a video on creating pantheons. Like, because you know, if a lot of you want it, I suppose I'm just gonna have to do what you say. Consider how the religions interact with the populace and the government. Is there tension and strife? Do the different faiths compete for worshippers? Do they not care? Is the dominant religion making a ploy to take over the government? By the way, if you'd like some additional help designing your next town or city, we recently published a new resource in the September issue of Lair magazine, Trial and Trust, entitled Creating a Settlement. This resource walks through some of the basics of town creation, but it also gives you lots of tables with some of of the intricate details you'll need. For instance, it lists the various types of religions you might have in the town and central religious figures to consider. It doesn't cover everything I talk about in this video here, but it does have a lot of good information that will help you flesh out your next town or city. Now, you can instantly get this issue of Lair magazine by becoming a DM Lair patron at the link below, but you'll also get access to last month's issue, and then every month you'll get another. Lair magazine is full of easy-to-use 5th edition resources designed to be dragged and dropped into your D&D game. Adventures, digital maps, new monsters, traps, puzzles, and more. Our goal is to help you reduce your prep time because you're probably busy like the rest of us, and maybe even help make your games more fun for you and your players. Number 7, major buildings and a map. What are the major buildings in town that the group is likely to go to? A tavern, an inn, a weaponsmith, a grocer, alchemy shop, government offices, guard barracks, and a jail. We've played D&D, we know how the game goes, we know what happens when they go into the town, we know where they want to go, and what trouble they're likely to get into. So think about that stuff and flesh out basic information about them. The name of who they might encounter there, basic services, etc. Going to the inn, you want to know their name. You're gonna get thrown in jail? Maybe you should know the name of the guard there. Actually, they're probably just gonna fight the guards and kill all the guards and then kill the rest of the townsfolk and just take everything for themselves because we've all played D&D before. We know how this works, right? Actually, my groups have never done that. But I've heard horror stories. I have. Do you have a horror story? That was so dumb. This is also probably a good time to make a map of the town, but you really only need to show the major buildings and structures, like, the walls and stuff. And consider things like, are there different wards in the town? Is there a trade ward, a temple ward, a noble ward? Is there a commoner's ward? And what types of buildings are you likely to find in those different wards? Now for Airedale, this is the map we created, and we divided the town into Trade District, where the merchants and businesses predominantly are, North District, which has the nobles and the ruler, and South District, which is where most of the other folk, the common residents, would live. Number 8, important NPCs. Now, most of the things we've been mentioning thus far need NPCs to go with them. Rulers of the town, officers in the police or army, judges, priests and clerics, heads of the merchant cartel, the innkeeper, etc., etc. At the very least, you should have names for them, and you could have a basic description for them and motivations for them if you want to. That's probably a bonus. If you're comfortable coming up with that stuff on the fly, then feel free to do so, although prepping it in advance is never going to hurt anything. Also, motivations are important. If you can know the NPC's goals in life or in the short term, this will help you roleplay them when the adventurers come across them in the game. Number 9, attitude of the populace. How does the populace, the common person in this town, treat the adventurers? Are they welcoming? Are they distrustful? Are they disdainful? You see, this is going to help you roleplay general NPCs in the town as your players adventure there. It's going to help create an atmosphere to that town too that might be intriguing and mysterious, and your players might want to know why everybody in the town seems to hate adventurers. Number 10, strife. This is one of the most important considerations when designing a town for a role-playing game. Because we are running a game, we want there to be ample opportunities for adventure. You get adventure from having problems, and problems come from friction and strife and issues that are happening in your town or city. So consider, what problems are there in the town? Are there bad guys? What are they up to and why? Is there a feud between different groups or businesses in town? Is the ruler up to no good? Is evil brewing in the sewers below? Is the town to the east planning an invasion? These are the plot hooks that can form the basis for adventures in the town. They can be either part of your main campaign arc or side quests that characters can either ignore or decide to go on. Click right up here to learn how to make boss fights more memorable, or right down here to become a DM Lair patron, get our Creating a Settlement resource, and get a new issue of Lair magazine every month. And until next time, Ed, stop making fun of my dear sweet chihuahua. Thank you.